Good morning, friends, and welcome to our meeting for worship this morning. I'll be facilitating, and as we were just discussing, since Lynn can't be with us this morning due to other obligations, we won't begin with music as we usually do. So I guess we'll go just straight into our announcements and joys and concerns, if anyone has those.
On Wednesday of this week at 1:30, uh, the women from West Newton and the women from Valley Mills Friends Church um, meet together for USFW meeting. And we meet at the Valley Mills Church.
Hearing no further announcements or joys and concerns, remain mindful that we have much, as always, to be thankful for. I am Jonathan Hubbard, and I will be the worship leader today and will speak out of the silence as I feel led. Young people today aren't interested in religion. Young people are turned off by doctrine and dogma. Young people are looking for community, not a creed. These pronouncements, and many similar ones that constitute a variation on a theme, have been spoken in my hearing in mainline Christian spaces for approximately a quarter of a century. I've heard Episcopalians, Presbyterians, Methodists, Quakers, and others make these kinds of statements as though they were observing facts as indisputable as the green of the grass or the blue of the sky. The problem is, as best I can tell, that the assumptions which lie at the heart of these kinds of statements aren't necessarily correct. And I submit that the default acceptance of the idea that young people are largely done with that kind of religion has had catastrophic effects for mainline religious bodies. But what do I mean by that kind of religion? What I'm referring to is, quite simply, the kind of religion that is capable of articulating itself and willing to articulate itself in a coherent way. A kind of religion that is clear about its most basic tenets and gives its adherents a foundation upon which to stand. And as I hope to demonstrate in this message, not only are a great many young people interested in this kind of religion, significant numbers of them are actually joining churches that offer it. The September 2023 issue of Friends Journal was entitled Younger Friends Becoming Quaker and featured articles written by multiple younger friends of varying views. One of these in particular stood out to me because it echoed sentiments I had encountered in various spaces among younger, non-Quaker people of faith. The article was entitled Young Adults Want What Early Friends Had. The article was written by Olivia Chalkley, whose Friends Journal biography at the time stated that she, quote, is a young adult friend living in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She's an alum of Guilford College's Quaker Leadership Scholars Program and the 2017-2018 Quaker Voluntary Service Atlanta, Georgia cohort. She currently works for the School of the Spirit Ministry, where she helps create spaces for friends to unite spiritual deepening practices with worldly witness. I would refer friends to both her full article and also the Friends Journal author chat interview with her, which can be accessed on YouTube. Olivia's article speaks very much to the point I'm seeking to make, and I will read from portions of it now. From Olivia. I became a Quaker when I was 14, which means that this year I celebrate having spent half of my life among friends. Over the past 14 years, I have seen my faith shift and transform many times over within the religious society of friends. These days, I'm not so sure where I fit in as a young adult and Christ-centered friend who finds herself in Quaker spaces that often feel more like liberal discussion groups than church. I fluctuate between leadings to seek the spiritual enrichment I need elsewhere and leadings to stick around and invest in the community that raised me. I'm hoping my experience might shed some light on our condition as a community and the spiritual conditions of my generation more broadly, and inform our revitalization endeavors. I started attending Baltimore yearly meeting young friends gatherings as a freshman in high school, finding community there among like-minded peers that was severely lacking at my school. Quakerism became the most important thing in my life, but my understanding of it was shallow. It was, for me and most of my peers, about community and about holding vaguely progressive political views, and also about being not Christian like that. We didn't come to this mindset on our own. Like most kids and youth groups, we were mirroring the adults in our lives and meetings. The dominant culture was spiritual, but not religious, community-focused, but often cliquish, and positioned squarely against the rest of organized Christianity. I went off to Guilford College in Greensboro, North Carolina, smugly assured of my secular faith. My worldview was promptly blown up when I took my first class with Professor Max Carter. Max introduced me and many of the young adults in my Quaker Leadership Scholars Program cohort to a Quakerism that did not shy away from Christian spirituality, but rather used it to strengthen our faith and practice. He helped us connect with early friends and mystics to make sense of our schisms and why contemporary Quakerism looks the way it does. He helped us claim ownership over it and imbued us with a sense that we might have the power to reimagine it. I came to understand that to call myself a Quaker and not a Christian was no longer possible. Living with integrity meant I had to choose to go deeper or go elsewhere. Later in the article, she notes, according to a 2022 report on the future of religion in America by Pew Research Center, the number of parents that decide to raise their children without religion is steadily increasing. This trend is reflected in my anecdotal experience as a young adult. Aside from holidays and family events, my upbringing was mostly irreligious, and the same was true for most of my friends growing up, especially those whose parents had been raised Christian. As each generation rebels against the one before it, many of my peers are now hungry for not just spirituality, but also often religion. As a Twitter user, I have a front row seat to the bizarre wave of traditionalist Catholicism that's sweeping New York's Dimes Square arts scene and garnering media attention. In my own life, I have numerous friends and acquaintances who were raised with little to no religion and are now starting Bible study groups, attending church regularly, and even taking catechism classes. Picking up on Olivia's point about the wave of traditionalist Catholicism, the Roman Catholic Church has been experiencing a significant increase in people returning to the faith and converting to it in recent years. For example, just this Easter, this year, in many dioceses saw the highest number of new Catholics in decades. The Shrine of the Immaculate Conception alone witnessed approximately 1,800 converts just this year, and many dioceses across the country have seen similar numbers. This constitutes the largest number of converts in recent history, consisting of significant numbers of new Gen Z and millennial Catholics. Much of this growth has been observed since 2022. But how can this be? We've been told for decades now that the Roman Catholic Church is exactly the kind of religious body that's supposed to be withering and dying before our very eyes. Its doctrine, its dogma, its creeds and catechism, its strange vestments and antiquated language are turnoffs for young people. These are facts. Only it turns out they're not. In fact, religious bodies which continue to decline in America are far more likely to be the mainline bodies which insist on maintaining a theology so vague that current members, never mind prospective ones, find it nearly impossible to zero in on what the tradition is really based on. This very much includes a significant portion of the Religious Society of Friends. The portion of our society which seems to view Quakerism as little more than another form of low church evangelical Protestantism is another topic altogether. And while I do have things to say about that, I would postpone for another day. Admittedly, this is a deep topic. No single factor explains the major demographic shifts in mainline or other religious groups. So I would emphasize that. Also, my exploration of this matter is limited, of course, by time. But in terms of the Religious Society of Friends, I believe that one major shift is that much of the Religious Society of Friends has been transformed by those who have joined it over the past few decades. Over those decades, the number of convinced friends in many meetings came to outnumber those who were raised in Quakerism. Many of those folks found a home in Quakerism because it was unlike the more fundamentalist traditions in which they were raised. Believe me, as someone raised in a corner of the American Restoration movement called the Church of Christ, I can relate to this experience. And yet, the experience of fleeing a fundamentalist tradition for a more tolerant and progressive one doesn't resonate with many today. Increasingly, younger people not only aren't raised in very conservative religious traditions, most aren't raised in a religious tradition at all. They aren't having the experience of, for example, the baby boomer generation that gave us the American counterculture of the 1960s. They aren't motivated to tear it all down and start over because they have been born and raised in a world that is reeling from the massive social, cultural, and particularly technological upheavals of the past 20 to 30 years. Those aged 30 and younger, roughly speaking, haven't received by inheritance the assumptions about Christianity and at least semi-biblical literacy of previous generations. They have grown up in a Western world that is rooted in the meaningless materialism of late-stage capitalism and of rising authoritarianism. Is it any wonder that many of them are turning to religious traditions that give them a sense of place, of things permanent, of truth? Religious traditions that aren't ashamed or afraid of offending someone by simply presenting their understanding of truth? Amidst all of this, I'm sorry to say that the Religious Society of Friends has struggled to remain relevant. As mentioned earlier, many meetings in the past decades became dominated in terms of membership by convinced friends who not only found something in Quakerism, they also changed Quakerism. This is understandable, and most every faith tradition welcomes new participants. However, in the case of Quakerism, a downside has been that a significant portion of the Religious Society of Friends became utterly transformed by those who joined it in the mid to late 20th century, often for reasons related to social justice causes of various kinds, including the anti-Vietnam War movement. A reshaping occurred in which social justice concerns came more to the forefront than spiritual or theological ones. This shift was particularly significant in liberal unprogrammed meetings, which, lacking clergy, and as mentioned over time, lacking older, seasoned friends to act as guides, developed the now ubiquitous sense that you don't have to believe anything specific to be a Quaker, which is seen throughout much of our society. Over time, as Olivia mentions in her Friends Journal article, many meetings became more akin to liberal discussion groups than religious communities. Largely absent was a sense of the present and teaching Christ. Instead, less specifically Christian language took hold. References to the light, however defined, largely displaced references to the light of Christ. And certainly absent was any sense of the refiner's fire, illuminating and consuming the, yes, sin in the lives of friends. Gone too was the sense, to paraphrase a quote that I encountered in the work of contemporary Quaker author Patricia Dahlman, and what I believe was her book, The Light That Is Given, that the inward light of Christ is universally bestowed, but not universally received. In other words, the inward light of Christ is certainly present within all persons, but the individual is called to submit themselves and their will to the inward teacher who is Christ. In this way, redemption is worked out from within. This isn't a message one is likely to hear articulated in any real way in most modern Friends meetings. In my opinion, Friends spend far too much time navel-gazing and focusing on social activism than in articulating to the world why we actually exist as friends. The moment something like this is stated in Quaker spaces, however, we immediately hear things like, but if you ask two Quakers the same question, you'll get 10 answers, or getting Quakers to agree on anything is like herding cats. But really, how is that working out for us? I think we all know the answer to that. Poorly. Quakerism is dying in the West. I strongly suspect that it will be functionally dead altogether within the next 20 to 30 years, possibly sooner at the current rate. So clearly, Jonathan is advocating a Quaker magisterium, adoption of a creed, and that all friends march lockstep in agreement about all things all the time, right? No. For one thing, as a partnered gay man who carries the wounds of spiritual trauma caused by my aforementioned upbringing in a fundamentalist Christian tradition, I'm unlikely to fare well in an exceedingly conservative, biblically literalistic environment. Quakers don't have to adopt a creed, a catechism, or some kind of orthodoxy test in order to articulate basic facts about our faith. And there are basic facts about Quakerism, which we can express and discuss. Quakerism isn't so mystical or so experiential in nature that it lies beyond the realm of human language. The issue isn't that Quakerism defies description. The issue is that Quakers all too often refuse to use the language of our own tradition to do the describing. This is rooted not in historical Quakerism, and certainly not in the teachings of Christ, but rather in the hesitancies native to much of the Quakerism of the latter half of the 20th century, and I'm sorry to say, the early part of the 21st, at least thus far. So what exactly is being advocated for here, you may be wondering? Well, what I'm advocating is no easy thing, and I will confess fully that I think it is unlikely to occur in today's religious society of friends. However, I'm strongly convinced that friends must come together around those basic truths which have always been at the heart of our message. These are actually quite simple truths, although truths that have become, in my opinion, almost surrealistically controversial. Here is what I consider to be a short list of them in no particular order. I offer them in response to many of the ideas that I most regularly encounter among friends, which I believe lie at the heart of our greatest challenges. Quakerism has a theology. An ocean of ink has been spilled communicating it across the last 4 centuries. This theology is readily available to us, and we should return to it. Quakerism is an evangelical faith. Quakerism was one of the largest religious groups in the American colonies as immigrants to the New World brought the faith to these shores from Great Britain. Quakerism grew because it was preached. It can and should be preached again. Quakerism is theistic. Quakerism is Christian. The essence of Quakerism can be summarized in the simple statement, Christ is come to teach his people himself. All else that is the religious society of friends flows from this. Now, you may have your own list of the basic truths of Quakerism. Or, considering what is more statistically likely, you may think that what I just articulated is anathema to Quakerism. Believe me, I'm not so naive as to believe for 1 minute that the above list would be agreeable to all friends. But I don't turn away from the controversy associated with this subject. It must be faced by Quakers. We have to discuss it, and if we're going to survive, we have to come to some actual conclusions about who we are and, yes, what we believe. I don't believe that Quakerism can save itself by becoming more evangelically Protestant, nor by descending further into the relativism that characterizes so much of the religious society of friends already. Instead, Quakerism will save itself by becoming more Quaker, by returning to the essence of what gave rise to the religious society of friends in the first place. And that is a sole reliance on the presence of Christ Jesus in our midst, guiding and teaching. This requires only the openness of our spirits to his presence, not a creed or a book of dogma, but rather a living relationship with the person of Christ. Quakerism is going to change. It's either going to change by dying as a result of stasis, or it's going to change in order to survive. If the religious society of friends survives into the future, it will be because, logically, people have joined it. On our current course of maintaining this theological status quo, of fearing the consequences of articulating ourselves to ourselves and the world, I would say that the likelihood of extinction grows considerably. But my hope is that, as a religious society, we will take to heart the closing words of Olivia Chalkley's Friends Journal article. She says, as we seek a renewal of Quaker vitality, let's look to our roots that are as Christ-centered as they are revolutionary. Let's ground our worldly witness in scripture and prayer, as well as deepen our individual connections to spirit. Let's clarify our commitments, and let's not forget where we came from. The young people, or at least some of them, are both telling us and demonstrating to us what they need from faith communities. Are we paying attention? This is the point in our meeting for worship when we know some folks have to leave us for other obligations. For those who do, we wish you well for the coming week, and we will resume with silence for the rest of our time together.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. You've articulated something that I've been trying to figure out how to articulate for quite some time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Good message, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm. Right. Oh. Hmm. 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 Wow.
Well, friends, if all hearts are open, I think we're coming to the end of our time together or close to it.
Thank you, Jonathan. It was a very informative message.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Paul. Glad you were with us.
Friend speaks my mind, you know. I heard that. I absolutely agree. And, you know, there was like, woo, you know.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well stated. Well, you know, an excellent perspective, especially during the times which, quite frankly, I find tumultuous, which is why I'm extra protective of my children. You know,
Right.
I mean, there's just like, wow, really? You know, crazy, bad stuff happening.
Right.
So,
I think we're all feeling that for sure.
yeah, no, and thank you for speaking it, and affirming it in a way that, you know, I can't get the mind because I'm like, you know.
It's overwhelming. For sure.
Yes. Yeah. And then I spoke to people about, you know, why I can't show them pictures and where we're moving to. And you hit it right on the head. That's exactly, you know, but I can see a time when that changes. I can say,
Right.
hey, you know, a Heidi Ho from, you know.
That's everyone's hope.
Yeah, by the way, I love this meeting. I'm so glad that I discovered and I've been attending it. And the times that there's been meetings because I've been so busy um with moving and also stupidness, you know. So
We're glad to have
thank you,
you this
Jonathan.
morning.
Yeah,
And good to
thank you,
see you,
thank you,
Sue and Chip.
Thank you again, Jonathan. It's
thank
good.
you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.
Have a good week.
Yeah,
Take
you
care.
do,
Have a good
everybody,
one.
the same. Blessed be.
Bye.